Reed Holloway pulled his battered Ford pickup into the pristine driveway of his daughter's house. The lawn looked like it belonged in a magazine, every blade of grass the same height, every edge sharp enough to cut skin. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, studying the house. White siding, black shutters, a front door painted the color of money. Everything perfect, everything cold. The doorbell chimed some fancy tune when he pressed it. Through the glass panels, he watched Killian Myers approach. Tall, lean, wearing khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than Reed's monthly electric bill. The man's smile switched on like a light bulb. "Reed, come in, come in." Killian stepped back, gesturing with the practiced ease of someone used to being in charge. "Avery's just finishing up in the kitchen." Reed stepped inside, his work boots making dull thuds on the hardwood. The house smelled like vanilla candles and something chemical and clean that made his nose itch. Family photos lined the hallway, all stage smiles and perfect lighting. "Can I get you something to drink? Beer? Wine? I got nice Pinot Noir from." "Water's fine." Killian's smile flickered but held. "Of course." "Avery," he called toward the kitchen. "Your dad's here." Reed heard something clatter, followed by a sharp intake of breath. A moment later, Avery appeared in the doorway. His daughter looked smaller somehow, wearing a loose sweater despite the warm evening. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, and when she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Dad." She moved toward him carefully, like someone walking on ice. When she hugged him, her body felt fragile against his chest. "You look tired," Reed said, studying her face. "Work's been crazy." Her laugh sounded hollow. "You know how it is." Killian appeared with a glass of water, ice cubes clinking. "Avery's been putting in long hours at the nonprofit. I keep telling her she needs to slow down, but you know how stubborn she is. Gets it from you, I'm sure." Reed took the glass without thanking him. "What kind of work you doing now, honey?" "Grant writing. For the women's shelter downtown." Avery's voice was steady, but she was wrapping her arms around herself. "It's good work. Important. That's my girl." Reed meant it. Avery had always wanted to help people, even as a kid. "Your mother would be proud." Something flickered across Killian's face at the mention of Loretta. "Dinner should be ready soon. Why don't we sit down?" The dining room continued the house's theme of expensive emptiness. Crystal glasses caught the light from an overhead fixture that probably cost more than Reed's truck. Killian pulled out a chair for Avery with exaggerated politeness. "So, Reed," Killian said, settling into his own chair, "how's retirement treating you? Must be nice not having to punch a clock anymore. Stay busy enough." Reed watched Avery pour wine with hands that trembled slightly. "Working on some projects around the house." "That's great. Really great. You know, if you ever need anything yard work, maintenance, I know some excellent contractors. Professionals, licensed and bonded." The message was clear. Reed's blue-collar skills weren't welcome here. He'd fixed submarines in the Marine Corps and machined parts for aerospace companies for 30 years, but to Killian, he was just another old man with dirty fingernails. Avery returned from the kitchen carrying a casserole dish. The sleeves of her sweater were long enough to cover her hands, but when she reached across the table, the fabric rode up. Reed caught a glimpse of yellow-green bruising around her wrist before she quickly pulled the sleeve back down. "This looks wonderful," Killian said, serving himself a generous portion. "Avery's become quite the cook since we got married. Haven't you, sweetheart?" His hand brushed against hers as he reached for the serving spoon. Avery flinched, a quick, involuntary movement that she tried to cover by reaching for her wine glass. Reed saw it all. He'd been trained to notice details, to read situations, to identify threats. His daughter was afraid. "How's business, Killian?" Reed kept his voice level, conversational. "Excellent. We just landed a major contract with the city. Infrastructure improvements. Roads, sidewalks, that sort of thing. It's going to give back to the community, you know?" Killian launched into a detailed explanation of municipal contracts and project management. Reed nodded occasionally, but kept his attention on Avery. She picked at her food, barely eating. When Killian gestured enthusiastically about some aspect of his work, she shrank back slightly in her chair. "The key is building relationships," Killian continued. "Trust. People need to know they can count on you to deliver what you promise." Trust's important, Reed agreed. Man's only as good as his word. Exactly. Though sometimes people make promises they can't keep, or they change their minds about what they want. That can be frustrating. The way Killian said it, with a glance toward Avery, made Reed's jaw clench. He took a slow sip of water and forced his hands to remain steady on the table. Avery, you're not eating much, Killian observed. Are you feeling all right? I'm fine. Just tired. You should take better care of yourself. I worry about you working so late, especially in that neighborhood. There are a lot of dangerous people down there. Unstable people. Reed set down his fork. What kind of dangerous people? Oh, drug addicts, criminals, people with mental health issues. The shelter attracts all types. I keep telling Avery she should find something safer, but she's determined to save the world. Killian's tone was fond, but there was an edge underneath. She doesn't always make the best decisions about her own safety. Avery's smart, Reed said. Always has been. She can take care of herself. Of course she can. But a husband worries, It's natural to want to protect the people you love. The word protect hit Reed wrong. Men who actually protected people didn't need to talk about it. They just did it. Avery stood abruptly. I should get dessert. I'll help, Reed said, starting to rise. No, Dad. Stay. I've got it. She disappeared into the kitchen again. Reed heard cabinet doors opening and closing, the sound of running water. When Killian spoke again, his voice was quieter. I'm glad you came tonight, Reed. Avery needs her family. She's been emotional lately. Stressed. I think the work at the shelter is getting to her more than she admits. Reed studied the man across from him. Killian's face was sincere, concerned. If Reed hadn't seen Avery flinch, hadn't noticed the bruises, he might have believed it. How so? Little things. She gets upset over nothing. Starts arguments. Last week she got hysterical because I asked her to turn down the TV. Killian shook his head sadly. I think she's having some kind of breakdown. The stress, And she's still grieving your wife. Loretta's death hit her hard. It was a clever move using Loretta's memory to explain away whatever damage he was doing to their daughter. Reed felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. Avery returned with coffee and store-bought cookies arranged on a fancy plate. Her movements were careful, controlled. When she sat back down, she kept her eyes on the table. These are good cookies, Reed said, trying to draw her out. Thanks. I know they're not homemade, but they're perfect, Killian interrupted. Everything you do is perfect. He reached over and squeezed her hand. Avery went rigid. Reed finished his coffee quickly. I should get going. Early day, tomorrow. Of course. Thanks for coming, Dad. It was nice to see you. Avery walked him to the door while Killian stayed in the dining room, clearing dishes with loud efficiency. At the threshold, Reed stopped. You can call me anytime, right? Day or night. I know. Her voice was barely a whisper. I mean it, honey. Anytime. She nodded, but didn't look at him. When she closed the door, Reed heard the deadbolt slide home. Reed's house sat on 3 acres outside Eugene, surrounded by Douglas firs and the kind of quiet that only came with space between neighbors. He'd built most of it himself after getting out of the Marines, nothing fancy, but solid. A place where a man could think. That he poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a heavy glass and sat at the kitchen table. The house felt empty without Loretta's presence, but tonight the silence was different. Tonight it felt like waiting. The photo on the table showed Avery at 18, laughing as Loretta tried to fix her graduation cap. Both women had the same smile, the same stubborn chin. Loretta would have known what to do. She'd always been better with words, better at getting people to open up. Reed solved problems with his hands, not his mouth that he'd seen bruises before. In the core, he'd learned to recognize the signs of abuse among military families. The careful movements, the way victims isolated themselves, the defensive responses. But knowing what to look for and knowing how to fix it were different things entirely. The bourbon burned going down, but it didn't wash away the image of Avery flinching when her husband touched her. Headlights swept across the kitchen window, followed by the rumble of a diesel engine. Marcel Boone's truck pulled into the driveway, and Reed heard his friend's uneven footsteps on the porch. Marcel had taken shrapnel in his left leg during Desert Storm and walked with a permanent limp. Doors open. Reed called. Marcel, entered carrying a socket wrench set. Came to return this. Thanks for the loan. Keep it. I've got 2 others. Marcel settled into the chair across from Reed, eyeing the bourbon bottle. Reed poured another glass without being asked. You look like someone shot your dog, Marcel said. Just thinking. About? Reed took another sip. Marcel was one of the few people who knew when to push and when to wait. They'd known each other for 15 years, ever since Marcel had moved into the property next door. Both veterans, both men who understood that some conversations happened in their own time. Had dinner with Avery and her husband tonight. How's that going? The marriage. Reed turned the glass in his hands, watching the amber liquid catch the overhead light. Killian Myers. You know him? Name sounds familiar. What? Works for the city. Some kind of project manager. Marcel frowned. Killian Myers. Yeah, I think he brought his car to my shop once. Fancy Audi. Silver. He paused. Arrogant prick, if I remember right. Kept checking his phone while I explained what was wrong with his transmission. Made some comment about mechanics, not understanding modern engineering. That's him. What about him? Reed set down his glass. I think he's hurting my daughter. The words hung in the air between them. Marcel's expression shifted, becoming sharper, more focused. You sure? Saw bruises on her wrist. She flinched when he touched her. Reed's voice was steady, matter of fact. Way she was acting, I've seen it before. Marcel leaned back in his chair. What are you going to do? Don't know yet. Police. With what? Some bruises and a feeling. Reed shook his head. He's smart. Careful. Talk tonight about how emotional she's been, how stressed. Setting up a narrative in case she tries to report him. Bastard. They sat in silence for a while, drinking bourbon and listening to the wind in the trees outside. Finally, Marcel spoke. You want my advice? If you've got any, document everything. Take pictures if you can. Build a case. Marcel's voice was grim. But be careful. Men like that, they don't go down easy. And they sure as hell don't like being challenged. Reed nodded. He'd been thinking the same thing. You need help with anything, you call me, Marcel continued. Day or night. I mean it. Appreciate it. After Marcel left, Reed sat alone with the photo and the bourbon. Outside, an owl called from somewhere deep in the trees. He thought about Avery as a little girl, fearless and stubborn, climbing trees and skinning her knees. Loretta used to say their daughter had too much of Reed's pride and not enough sense of her own limits. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe Avery was still trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed, still believing she could love someone enough to change them. Reed finished his drink and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Avery's face at the dinner table, careful, controlled, afraid. Reed's internal clock woke him at 0200, same as it had for 40 years. Old habits from the core died hard. He lay in bed for a moment, listening to the house settle around him. Something felt wrong. Not wrong with the house, wrong in his gut. The way it used to feel before enemy contact overseas. He dressed quietly in dark clothes and drove through the empty streets of Eugene. Most of the city was asleep, streetlights casting yellow pools on empty asphalt. The Myers neighborhood was even quieter, all those perfect lawns and expensive cars tucked safely behind security systems. Reed parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, staying in the shadows between streetlights. The training never really left you how to move without being seen, how to observe without being observed. The Myers house was dark except for a light in an upstairs window that he had a key. Avery had given it to him a year ago, when they'd gone out of town for Killian's work conference. Just in case something happens, she'd said. You know, emergency or whatever. At the time, Reed had thought it was unnecessary. Now he was grateful for his daughter's practical nature. The key turned silently in the lock. Reed eased the front door open just enough to slip inside, then closed it behind him. The house smelled like vanilla candles and something else, something metallic and sharp that made his throat tighten. The living room was a disaster. Couch cushions on the floor, a coffee table overturned, magazines scattered like fallen leaves. And there, curled up on the floor beside the couch, was Avery. She was conscious but barely moving, one arm wrapped around her ribs, the other pressed against her face. When she saw Reed, she didn't scream or jump. She just stared at him with eyes that looked too old for her 30-year-old face. Dad. Her voice was thick, muffled. Reed knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he assessed the damage. Her left eye was swollen shut, and blood had dried around her nose. When she tried to sit up, she winced and pressed harder against her ribs. Where is he? Reed's voice was barely a whisper. Upstairs. Sleeping. Avery's good. I found his face. He thinks I passed out. I'll let him think that. Reed helped her sit up against the couch, moving slowly, carefully. How long has this been going on? Doesn't matter now. It matters to me. Avery was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was flat, empty. Since about 6 months after we got married. Started with grabbing my arm too hard when he was angry. Then pushing. Then, she gestured weakly at her face. Why didn't you call me? Because I knew what you'd do. She looked at him directly now. Her good, I steady despite everything. And I wasn't ready for that. What changed? Tonight, he said. Avery swallowed hard. He said Mom would be ashamed of what I'd become. That she'd be disgusted by how weak I am. Reed felt something dark and violent unfurl in his chest. Using Loretta's memory to hurt their daughter was a line no man should cross. Stay here, he said, standing up. Dad, don't. Stay here. Reed moved through the house like he was clearing a building overseas. Kitchen clear. Dining room clear. Living room secured. He climbed the stairs, each step deliberate and silent. The master bedroom door was open. Killian Myers lay sprawled across a king-size bed, wearing expensive pajamas and snoring softly. Reed studied him for a moment. In sleep, the man looked smaller, younger. Ordinary. Reed flipped on the bedroom light. Killian jolted awake, blinking and confused. When he saw Reed standing at the foot of his bed, his face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, fear, anger, and finally a kind of calculated calm. Reed, what are you doing here? Checking on my daughter. Killian sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair. She's fine. Just had a little too much wine at dinner. You know how emotional she gets when she drinks. That's not what I see downstairs. Look, I know how this must appear, but shut up. The words cut through Killian's explanation like a blade. Reed moved around the bed, his movements controlled but predatory. You hit my daughter. That's not she fell. She was drunk and angry, and she fell. I tried to help her, but she started screaming at me, saying horrible things about our marriage, about you, about her mother. Reed's fist connected with Killian's jaw before the man could finish the lie. The impact sent Killian sprawling backward across the bed, blood already starting to flow from his split lip. That's for using my wife's memory to hurt our daughter. Killian tried to scramble away, but Reed grabbed him by the pajama shirt and hauled him upright. The fabric tore, and Killian stumbled, his eyes wide with fear. Please, we can talk about this. I love Avery. I would never intentionally hurt her. Reed's second punch caught him in the stomach, doubling him over. Killian retched and fell to his knees, gasping for air. That's for lying to my face. Stop, Killian wheezed. Please, I'll pay you. Whatever you want. The third punch was an uppercut that snapped Killian's head back and sent him crashing into the bedroom wall. He slumped to the floor, blood running from his nose, his eyes unfocused. That's for every time you put your hands on her. Reed stood over the broken man, his knuckles aching, but his breathing steady. Killian was conscious, but barely, making soft, whimpering sounds as he tried to crawl away. You ever touch my daughter again, Reed said quietly, and I'll kill you. Not hurt you, not scare you, kill you. Do you understand? Killian nodded frantically, tears mixing with the blood on his face. Reed walked back downstairs, where Avery was sitting exactly where he'd left her. She looked up when he appeared, taking in his bloodied knuckles and grim expression. Is he alive? Reed pulled out his phone and called Marcel. Reed? Christ, it's 2 a.m. I need you to come pick up Avery. Bring your truck. Marcel was quiet for a moment. Where are you? Killian's house. On my way. Reed ended the call and knelt beside his daughter again. We're going to get you cleaned up and out of here. What about him? He'll call the police. Probably claim I attacked him without cause. Reed's voice was matter of fact. They'll arrest me. Dad, no. I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. I made a choice. Reed brushed a strand of hair away from her good eye. Your mother made me promise to take care of you. I've been doing a poor job of it. Avery started to cry, then not the careful, silent tears of someone afraid to be heard, but deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere she'd kept locked away. Reed held her while she cried, and upstairs, Killian Myers groaned and tried to remember how to breathe. 20 minutes later, Marcel's truck pulled into the driveway. He took one look at Avery, and his face went hard as stone. Hospital? He asked. No, Avery said quickly. I just need ice and time. Marcel nodded and helped her to the truck while Reed gathered some of her belongings. As they pulled away, Reed saw lights coming on in the house. Killian was awake and moving. That IT would start now. The calls to police, the lawyers, the careful manipulation of truth and lies. Reed had given his daughter 4 hours of peace before the real war began. 4 hours. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. The police arrived at Reed's house at dawn, their cars forming a semicircle in his driveway like they were surrounding a bank robbery. Detective Paul Ramsey led the group, a thin man with nervous eyes who kept checking his notes as if he wasn't sure what he was supposed to be doing. Reed was drinking coffee at his kitchen table when they knocked. He'd been expecting them. Reed Holloway, I have a warrant for your arrest. On what charges? Assault in the first degree, breaking and entering, criminal trespass. Ramsey read from his notes like he was reciting a grocery list. You need to come with us. Reed set down his coffee cup and stood slowly. I want to call my daughter first. You can call from the station. The handcuffs were cold against his wrists. As they led him to the patrol car, Reed saw Marcel standing on his own porch, cell phone pressed to his ear. Good. Marcel would take care of things while Reed was gone. At the police station, Reed was processed like any other criminal. Fingerprints, photos, personal items confiscated. They put him in an interview room with white walls and a metal table that looked like it had been kicked a few times. Detective Ramsey entered carrying a file folder and a cup of coffee that smelled like it had been burned twice. So, Reed, want to tell me what happened last night? I want to check on my daughter. Found her beaten up. Took care of the problem. By took care of the problem, you mean you assaulted Killian Myers? I mean, I stopped him from hurting my daughter. Ramsey flipped through his notes. Mr. Myers tells a different story. Says you broke into his house and attacked him without provocation. Says you've been harassing him for months, making threats. Reed said nothing. He's got some pretty serious injuries. Broken nose, cracked ribs, concussion. Doctors say he's lucky you didn't kill him. Maybe next time. Ramsey's pen stopped moving. That sounds like a threat, Reed. It's a promise. The detective sighed and closed his folder. Look, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen domestic situations go bad. But you can't just take the law into your own hands. There are procedures, systems in place. Your systems were working real well for my daughter. Mr. Myers says your daughter has been struggling with alcohol and mental health issues. Says she's been making false accusations against him for months. He's got documentation, hospital records, witness statements. Reed felt the cold anger settling deeper in his chest. Killian had been planning this for a while, building his defense before Reed even knew there was a war. What kind of documentation? Emergency room visits where your daughter was treated for injuries she claimed were accidents. Neighbors who reported hearing arguments from the house. A therapist's report suggesting possible paranoid delusions brought on by grief over her mother's death. Each lie was precise, calculated. Killian had turned Avery's honest attempts to hide the abuse into evidence of her instability. Her grief over Loretta had become mental illness. Her injuries had become clumsiness or self-harm. You believe him? Ramsey shrugged. I believe evidence. And right now, the evidence says you committed assault and battery against a man who was trying to get help for his mentally ill wife. Reed was held overnight while his lawyer, a court-appointed attorney named Janet Walsh, who looked young enough to be his granddaughter, tried to arrange bail. The holding cell smelled like disinfectant and desperation, filled with men who'd made bad choices or just had bad luck. The next morning, Walsh met with him in the same interview room where Ramsey had questioned him. Bail's set at $50,000, she said without preamble. I can probably get you out today if you can make the 10%. I can make it. Good. Now, let's talk about your case. Walsh opened her own folder, this one considerably thinner than Ramsey's had been. The prosecution is going to paint you as a violent veteran with anger management issues who attacked an innocent man based on the paranoid fantasies of a mentally unstable daughter. In your strategy, self-defense won't work. You weren't defending yourself. Defense of others might work, but we'd have to prove your daughter was in immediate danger when you acted. Walsh looked up from her notes. The problem is, Mr. Myers is claiming she wasn't. He says she was drunk and fell down, and you misinterpreted the situation. What about her injuries? Compatible with a fall, according to the medical examiner. No defensive wounds, no clear pattern of assault. Reed absorbed this. What else? They're also going after your character. Military service can be a double-edged sword in court. On one hand, it shows discipline and service to country. On the other hand, it can suggest you're trained to use violence to solve problems. I am. Walsh winced. Maybe don't say that in court. Reed made bail that afternoon. Marcel picked him up at the jail, saying nothing as Reed climbed into the passenger seat of his truck. They drove in silence until they were out of the city. How's Avery? Reed asked, scared, angry, blaming herself for getting you arrested. Marcel glanced over at him. She's staying at my place for now. Figured it was safer than your house or hers. Good thinking. There's something else. Marcel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Killian's been busy while you were in lockup. Talked to some reporter from the local paper. Story came out this morning. Marcel handed him a folded newspaper. The headline read, "Local veteran arrested in domestic violence case." The article was short but damaging. It portrayed Reed as an unstable former Marine who had attacked his son-in-law based on unsubstantiated allegations from his emotionally disturbed daughter. Killian was quoted extensively, expressing concern for both Reed's mental health and Avery's safety. He's got the narrative locked down, Marcel said. Makes himself look like the victim and you look like the aggressor. Reed folded the paper and stared out the window. What about Avery? They mention her by name. Yeah, calls her troubled and struggling with substance abuse. Really paints a picture. Reed closed his eyes. Killian wasn't just defending himself, he was destroying Avery's credibility before she could tell her story. It was a smart move by a smart man who understood that the first version of events usually became the accepted version. We need to fight back, Reed said. How? I don't know yet. But we need help. Marcel's house was smaller than Reed's, but felt warmer somehow. Maybe it was the lived-in furniture or the photos of Marcel's late wife on the mantelpiece. Maybe it was just that it felt like a place where people actually laughed once in a while. Avery was sitting at Marcel's kitchen table when they walked in, staring at a laptop screen with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. The swelling around her eye had gone down, but the bruises had deepened to purple and yellow. She looked up when Reed entered, and he saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before: determination. Dad! She stood and hugged him, careful of her ribs. I'm sorry. This is all my fault. No, it isn't. If I had just left him. If. Reed held her at arm's length, studying her face. We deal with what is, not what should have been. Avery nodded and gestured toward the laptop. I've been doing research. On Killian, on his business, on everything I can find. Her voice was stronger than it had been the night before. I found some things. Reed sat down across from her. The laptop screen showed what looked like financial records, bank statements, contracts, emails. Where did you get this? I had access to some of his accounts. Joint checking, credit cards, that kind of thing. And I knew his passwords. Avery's smile was grim. He always used the same, one: his mother's maiden name and his birthday. Not very creative. Marcel peered over her shoulder. What were we looking at? Irregularities. Money going places it shouldn't. Payments to vendors that don't exist. Invoices for materials that were never delivered. Avery scrolled through screen after screen of data. He's been skimming from city contracts. Reed leaned back in his chair. How much? Hard to say exactly, but probably close to 100,000 over the past 2 years. Maybe more. That's a good start, Marcel said. But we need more than financial crimes. We need evidence of the abuse. I kept some things, Avery said quietly. Photos, medical records, voice messages. I hid them in a safety deposit box downtown. Why didn't you use them before? Avery was quiet for a moment. Because I kept thinking I could fix it. Fix him. Fix us. She looked up at Reed. Mom always said you could love someone enough to help them change. Your mother never met anyone like Killian. The front door opened, and a woman's voice called out, Marcel? You home? In here, Lila. A young woman appeared in the kitchen doorway, early 30s. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a work shirt. She looked at the assembled group with curious eyes. Sorry, didn't know you had company. Her gaze lingered on Avery's bruised face. Oh my God, Avery. Hi, Lila. The woman crossed the room quickly and knelt beside Avery's chair. What happened? Did he? She looked around the room, taking in Reed's bloodied knuckles and Marcel's grim expression. He did this to you. Lila Stokes, Marcel said by way of introduction. Avery's old roommate from college. Works in compliance at one of the tech companies downtown. Reed studied the newcomer. Compliance with what? Financial regulations, mostly. Contract oversight, fraud detection. Lila was still focused on Avery. I told you years ago that guy was bad news. Remember? At your wedding, I said he gave me the creeps. I remember. What can we do? Lila's voice was fierce. How can we help? Marcel filled her in on the events of the past 48 hours while Avery showed her the financial records. Lila's expression grew darker as she scrolled through the data. This is definitely fraud, she said finally. The question is whether we can prove it and whether anyone will care enough to investigate. What do you mean? Reed asked. Killian's connected. He's got relationships with city officials, contractors, vendors. If this goes public, it could embarrass a lot of people. Lila looked around the table. Sometimes it's easier to discredit the accusers than investigate the crimes. Reed felt the familiar weight of bureaucratic corruption settling on his shoulders. In the Marines, he'd seen good soldiers destroyed by politics and bad ones promoted because they knew the right people. Civilian life wasn't much different. So what do? We build a case they can't ignore, Lila said. Financial crimes, physical abuse, witness testimony. We make it bigger than just Killian. How? We find other victims. Men like this don't usually stop with one target. Lila closed the laptop and looked directly at Reed. And we find someone in the media who's willing to tell the real story. Marcel nodded slowly. I know someone who might help. Guy named Trevin Shaw. Does investigative reporting for the local paper and has a podcast about government corruption. He's not afraid to ruffle feathers. Can you set up a meeting? I can try. Reed looked around the table at the three people willing to help his daughter, a disabled veteran, a compliance officer, and a young woman who understood betrayal. It wasn't much of an army, but it was what they had. What do we need to do first? Avery reached across the table and took his hand. We get everything out of that safety deposit box. Photos, medical records, voice messages. All of it. Then what? Then we go to war. Trevin Shaw looked exactly like what he was, a journalist who'd spent too many years chasing stories that important people didn't want him to tell. Thin, pale, with the kind of nervous energy that came from drinking too much coffee and sleeping too little. He met them at a diner outside town, in a corner booth where he could watch the door. Marcel says you've got a story for me, Shaw said without preamble. Reed let Avery do most of the talking. She'd insisted on being the one to tell her story, and Reed understood why. She needed to take back control of her own narrative. Shaw listened without interrupting as Avery described 2 years of escalating abuse, verbal attacks that became physical violence, financial control disguised as protection, social isolation presented as love. When she finished, Shaw was quiet for a long moment. You got evidence? Avery slid a manila envelope across the table. Shaw opened it carefully, examining photos of injuries, medical records from emergency room visits, printouts of threatening text messages. These voice recordings, Shaw said, holding up a USB drive. What's on them? Threats. Him telling me what he'd do if I ever left him. What he'd do to my dad if I tried to get help. Avery's voice was steady now. There's one where he talks about having friends in the police department who would believe his word over mine. Shaw's eyebrows rose. Friends in the department? He mentioned Detective Ramsey by name. Said Paul owed him favors. Reed felt something cold settle in his stomach. Ramsey was the detective handling his case. There's more, Lila said, sliding a second envelope across the table. Financial records showing systematic fraud in city contracts. Overbilling, phantom vendors, kickbacks to officials. Shaw opened the second envelope and whistled softly. How much are we talking about? Conservatively? 200,000 over 3 years. Probably more. And you can prove this. I've traced the money through multiple accounts. Shell companies, dummy corporations, cash transfers to offshore accounts. Lila's voice was professional, confident. It's all there. Shaw studied the documents for several minutes, occasionally asking questions about dates, amounts, and verification methods. Finally, he looked up. This is good, really good, but you need to understand what you're up against. Shaw's expression was serious. Killian Myers isn't just some wife-beater. He's connected to some powerful people in this city. If I run this story, there's going to be pushback. What kind of pushback? Reed asked. Legal threats, attempts to discredit the sources, pressure on my editors to kill the story. Shaw shrugged. Standard stuff when you're going after someone with money and connections. Will that stop you? Shaw smiled for the first time since they'd sat down. I've been waiting 2 years for a story like this. Corruption, abuse of power, cover-ups, it's exactly the kind of thing that needs to see daylight. How long until you can publish? Give me a week to verify everything, reach out to other sources, build a case. I want this to be bulletproof when it goes live. They left the diner with a plan. Shaw would investigate the financial crimes, while Lila worked her contacts in the business community to find other victims of Killian's schemes. Avery would stay hidden at Marcel's house while Reed dealt with his own legal problems. But Killian wasn't waiting for them to build their case. 2 days later, Avery's bank accounts were frozen. The same day, she received divorce papers claiming mental instability and alleging that she had been financially abusive toward her husband. The paperwork was professionally done, clearly expensive, and designed to destroy her credibility before Shaw's story could run. He's trying to control the narrative, Walsh explained during a meeting at her office. If he can paint Avery as mentally unstable and financially irresponsible, it undermines everything else. Can he do that? Reed asked. He's doing it. The question is whether we can stop him. Walsh spread the divorce papers across her desk. The language was brutal claims that Avery had stolen money from joint accounts, that she had threatened suicide multiple times, that she had physically attacked Killian during arguments. None of this is true, Avery said. Truth isn't the point, Walsh replied. Perception is. If this gets filed in court, it becomes part of the public record. Media picks it up. People start to wonder if maybe Killian is the real victim here. Reed studied the papers. How do we fight it? We file our own motions. Restraining order, claims of abuse, financial fraud. Turn it into a war of paperwork and see who has the better lawyers. He does, Avery said quietly. His firm handles city contracts. They've got resources I don't. Walsh nodded grimly. Probably true, but we've got something he doesn't. What's that? The truth. And a journalist who's willing to tell it. Shaw's story ran the following Tuesday, both in the newspaper and on his podcast. The headline read, The Polished Predator, How a City Contractor Used Power to Hide Abuse and Fraud. Reed read it 3 times, impressed by the thoroughness of Shaw's research. The article laid out the financial crimes in detail, corroborated Avery's abuse allegations with medical records and witness statements, and raised serious questions about possible corruption in the police department. The response was immediate and intense. WY noon. Shaw was fielding calls from other news outlets wanting to follow up on the story. Killian's employer placed him on administrative leave pending an investigation. The city announced a review of all contracts his company had been awarded in the past 5 years, but Killian fought back hard. His lawyers filed defamation lawsuits against Shaw, the newspaper, and Avery. They released a statement claiming the story was based on fabricated evidence provided by a mentally ill woman and her violent father. They produced witnesses, neighbors, co-workers, even a therapist who testified to Avery's instability and Reed's aggressive behavior. It's going to get worse before it gets better, Shaw warned during a phone call that evening. Killian's got deep pockets, and he's not going down quietly. Reed was beginning to understand that the real fight wasn't in the courtroom or the newspaper, it was in the court of public opinion, where the truth often mattered less than who could tell the most convincing story. The nonprofit legal clinic occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse downtown, the kind of place where idealistic young lawyers went to save the world for $30,000 a year. Reed climbed the narrow stairs, following directions Lila had given him to find attorney David Kim. Kim was younger than Reed had expected, maybe 40, with the focused intensity of someone who'd chosen difficult cases over easy money. His office was cramped but organized, law books competing for space with stacks of case files. "Mr. Holloway, please sit down." Kim gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Lila tells me you need help with a complex domestic violence case." Reed settled into the chair, studying the lawyer. "My daughter's being railroaded by a man with money and connections. We need someone who isn't afraid of a fight. I specialize in fights, Mr. Holloway. The question is whether we can win this one." Kim opened a thick file folder. "I've reviewed the materials Lila provided. The financial fraud evidence is solid, but the domestic violence charges are more complicated." "How so?" "Your son-in-law has done an excellent job of establishing a counter-narrative. Painted your daughter as unstable, you as violent, himself as the victim. That's going to be hard to overcome in court." Reed leaned forward. "What do we need?" "More witnesses. Independent verification of the abuse. Evidence that contradicts his version of events." Kim made notes as he spoke. "And we need to be prepared for him to escalate his attacks on your daughter's credibility. He's already frozen her bank accounts." "I know. I'm filing motions this afternoon to restore her access to marital assets. But the real battle is going to be the restraining order hearing next week." Kim explained the legal strategy. They would argue that Killian's actions since Reed's arrest, freezing accounts, filing for divorce, hiring expensive lawyers to attack Avery's character demonstrated a pattern of controlling behavior consistent with domestic abuse. "The judge will want to see clear evidence of physical violence," Kim continued. "Medical records help, but they're not definitive. Hospital visits could be explained as accidents. What about the voice recordings? They're good, but Killian's lawyers will argue they were taken without consent and may not be admissible." Kim looked up from his notes. "We need something more recent. Something that shows he's still trying to control and intimidate your daughter." Reed was quiet for a moment, thinking, what if we gave him an opportunity to incriminate himself? "What do you mean?" "Set up a situation where he thinks he's safe, where he might say or do something that shows his true nature." Kim frowned. "That's dangerous territory, Mr. Holloway. If it looks like entrapment, it could backfire." "Not entrapment, just giving him enough rope." They spent another hour discussing legal tactics and evidence requirements. As Reed prepared to leave, Kim handed him a business card. "There's someone else you should talk to," Kim said. "Pete Newkirk. He's a contractor who had dealings with Killian a couple of years ago. Lila thinks he might have useful information." Reed drove across town to Newkirk's office, a converted garage behind a small ranch house. Pete Newkirk was exactly what Reed had expected: a working man with calloused hands and the kind of tan that came from years of outdoor labor. "You're Avery's father," Newkirk said without preamble. "Heard about what happened. That son of a bitch had it coming. Lila said you might have information about his business practices." Newkirk spat into a coffee can beside his desk. "Information? Hell, I got documentation. Contracts, emails, records of bribes he tried to get me to pay." "Bribe?" 3 years ago, I bid on a city sidewalk project. Low bid, good reputation, should have been a slam dunk. Newkirk pulled out a filing cabinet and extracted a manila folder. "Killian was the project manager. Told me the contract was mine, but there would be a consulting fee for his help navigating the approval process." Reed examined the document's emails discussing additional considerations: invoices for consulting services never provided, bank transfer records showing payments to shell companies. "I didn't pay," Newkirk continued. "Told him to go to hell. Next week, my bid was rejected for technical noncompliance. The contract went to his buddy's company for 30% more money. You reported this." "To who?" "Killian had friends in the city administration. My word against his, and he's got a college degree and a nice suit." Newkirk's expression was bitter. "Working guys like me don't usually win those fights." Reed studied the papers. "You willing to testify about this?" "Damn right I am." Been waiting 3 years for someone to take that bastard down. Driving back to Marcel's house, Reed felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. They were building a case that went beyond he said, she said accusations. Financial fraud, bribery, corruption crimes with paper trails and independent witnesses. But when he walked into Marcel's kitchen, he found Avery staring at her phone with a stricken expression. What is it? She handed him the phone without speaking. The screen showed a text message from an unknown number. Tell your father to drop the charges, or everyone will know what you really are. I have photos. Reed felt his jaw clench. What photos? I don't know. Maybe from when we were married, private moments. Avery's voice was shaky. He's threatening to release intimate photos if we don't back down. Marcel looked up from his newspaper. That's a crime. Maybe. But the damage would be done before anyone could prosecute him for it. Avery took back her phone. He knows exactly how to hurt me. Reed sat down across from her. What do you want to do? I want to fight. But I'm scared, Dad. He's always one step ahead. Always has another way to hurt me. Then we stop playing defense and start playing offense. How? Reed smiled grimly. We give him what he wants. A meeting. Just him and you. That's crazy. Hear me out. He thinks he's won. Thinks he's got you cornered with threats and lawyers and money. If you reach out, ask to meet, tell him you want to work things out. Reed let the idea settle. Men like Killian can't resist a chance to gloat. And then what? Then we record everything he says. The meeting was set for neutral ground, a coffee shop downtown, where Avery had often worked on grant proposals. Public enough to be safe, quiet enough for conversation. Reed positioned himself at a corner table with a clear view of the entrance, while Marcel waited outside in his truck. Avery sat near the window, a recording app active on her phone, the device partially hidden beneath a napkin. She looked nervous but determined, wearing a simple dress that concealed the small microphone Lila had borrowed from her tech company. Killian arrived precisely on time, dressed in an expensive suit that made him look like he was heading to a board meeting instead of confronting his estranged wife. He kissed Avery's cheek when he sat down, a gesture of false intimacy that made Reed's hands tighten into fists. You look better, Killian said, studying her face. The bruising is almost gone. It's healing. I'm glad. I never wanted things to get so out of hand. Killian's voice was warm, concerned. Your father really did a number on me, but I understand why he reacted the way he did. He thought he was protecting you. Reed watched his daughter's face carefully. She nodded, but said nothing. The thing is, Killian continued, we both know what really happened that night. You've been drinking, we had an argument, you fell and hurt yourself. When your father saw you, he jumped to the wrong conclusion. That's not how I remember it. Your memory has been affected by stress and alcohol, sweetheart. That's why you need help. Professional help. Killian reached across the table and took her hand. I've arranged for you to see Dr. Peterson again. She thinks a short stay at the residential facility might be beneficial. Avery pulled her hand away. You want to have me committed? I want to help you get better. The drinking, the paranoid thoughts about our marriage, the violent fantasies. They weren't fantasies. Killian's expression shifted slightly, a crack in his sympathetic facade. Avery, we've been through this. I never laid a hand on you in anger. Yes, we argued, but I never hit you, never hurt you intentionally. What about the bruises? Accidents. Clumsiness brought on by drinking. Killian's voice remained patient, but Reed caught the edge underneath. Dr. Peterson documented your alcohol-related coordination issues months ago. Reed realized how carefully Killian had planned this. The therapist, the medical records, the documented accidents, all building toward a narrative of mental illness and substance abuse. I want to come home, Avery said quietly. Killian's face lit up. Really? Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful. We can work through this together. But there will have to be conditions. What kind of conditions? No more contact with your father. He's a toxic influence, and his violence proves he's dangerous to both of us. Killian leaned forward, his voice taking on an urgent quality. You have to understand, Avery, he could have killed me. If the neighbors hadn't called the police when they did. The neighbors called. Mrs. Patterson heard the commotion and called 911. Thank God. Killian shook his head. Your father is unstable, honey. Military training, PTSD. Probably drinking too much since your mother died. He's not the man you remember from your childhood. Reed felt cold anger building in his chest. Killian was using Loretta's death against them again, twisting grief into mental illness. I just want things to go back to the way they were, Avery said. They can. But you have to drop these ridiculous abuse allegations. They're hurting both of us, and they're not based in reality. Killian's voice hardened slightly. The media attention, the legal battles, it's destroying our reputation and our future. What if I can't drop them? What if people don't believe me? They'll believe you if you tell the truth. Admit that you were confused, that your father influenced your perceptions, that you want to save your marriage. Killian smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. People love a redemption story. And if I don't, the mask slipped further. Then you'll lose everything. Your home, your financial security, your reputation. In those photos, I mentioned the intimate ones you thought I deleted. They'll find their way to your workplace, your friends, your father's neighbors. Avery's face went pale. You wouldn't. I don't want to. But if you force my hand by continuing this vendetta... Killian shrugged. I have to protect myself. Reed started to rise from his chair, but a movement near the coffee shop entrance caught his attention. A young woman had entered late 20s, professionally dressed, scanning the room nervously. When her eyes found Killian, her expression went rigid. The woman approached their table slowly, her hand shaking. Killian looked up and his face went white. Justine, he said, what are you doing here? I saw the news, the woman said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The article about you and what you did to your wife. Reed realized who this was, another victim, drawn out by Shaw's story. Justine, this isn't the time or place. You did the same thing to me. Justine's voice was getting stronger. When I was working for the city, the threats, the control, that's enough. Killian stood up quickly. You're confused, emotional. We could discuss this privately. No. Justine pulled out her phone. I recorded some of our conversations. The ones where you told me what would happen if I reported you. The ones where you described what you'd do to my family. Killian's composed facade cracked completely. You're making a mistake, Justine. I have friends in this city, people who will believe my word over yours. Like Detective Ramsey. Justine's smile was bitter. I know about your arrangement with him. The favors, the information sharing. I have records of that too. Reed felt the pieces clicking into place. Killian's confidence during the arrest, Ramsey's obvious bias, the quick dismissal of Avery's injuries, it was all connected. You're delusional, Killian said, but his voice lacked conviction. Both of you, mentally unstable women with histories of addiction and emotional problems. Is it your defense for everything? Avery asked, looking up at him. Everyone who tells the truth about you is mentally ill. Killian turned back to her, and for a moment, his true nature showed through completely. The truth is what I say it is, sweetheart. I have money, connections, influence. You have nothing except the word of broken women and a violent father. Actually, said a voice from behind him, she has a lot more than that. Detective Sarah Chun stood near their table, badge visible on her belt. Reed hadn't seen her enter, but she'd obviously been listening. Detective Chun, Internal Affairs, she said to Killian. We've been investigating allegations of corruption in the police department. Your name came up quite a bit. Killian's face went ashen. I don't know what you're talking about. Payments to Detective Ramsey for information about ongoing investigations. Advance warning about search warrants. Influence peddling in exchange for favorable treatment. Chen's voice was professional, matter of fact. Ms. Verrill here provided us with some very interesting recordings. Reed looked at Justine with new respect. She hadn't just come forward. Randomly, she'd been working with Internal Affairs, helping them build a case against Killian and his police contacts. This is harassment, Killian said, but his voice was shaking now. I want to call my lawyer. That's your right, Chen agreed. But first, I need to place you under arrest for bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud. As Chun read Killian his rights, Reed caught Avery's eye. She was staring at her husband, ex-husband, really with an expression of wonder, as if she was seeing him clearly for the first time. He's smaller than I thought, she said quietly. Reed understood. Without his money, his connections, his carefully constructed facade, Killian Myers was just another weak man who used power to hide his inadequacies. Yeah, Reed said. He is. 6 months later, Reed sat on his front porch watching Avery work in the garden. She'd replanted her mother's vegetable patch tomatoes, peppers, herbs that Loretta had loved. The morning sun caught the red highlights in Avery's hair, and for a moment, Reed could see Loretta in their daughter's profile. The trial had been a spectacle. Killian's lawyers had tried every trick in the book: character assassination, procedural delays, plea bargaining. But the evidence was overwhelming. Financial fraud, bribery, corruption, domestic violence. The charges kept multiplying as more victims came forward. In the end, Killian Myers was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The judge had been particularly harsh about the domestic violence charges, noting that men who used their power to terrorize women deserved no mercy from the court. Avery had testified for 2 days, calm and composed, recounting years of abuse with the kind of detailed precision that came from finally being believed. Reed had watched from the gallery, proud of his daughter's courage and ashamed that it had taken him so long to see what was happening. Detective Ramsey was facing his own legal troubles. Internal Affairs had found evidence of corruption going back years, not just with Killian, but with other influential citizens who'd bought favorable treatment. The entire police department was under federal investigation. "Coffee's ready," Avery called from the garden. Reed went inside and poured 2 cups, then returned to the porch. Avery joined him, dirt under her fingernails, looking more like herself than she had in years. "The tomatoes are coming along nicely," she said. "Your mother always said this was the best soil in Oregon for tomatoes." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the morning light filter through the Douglas firs. Avery had moved back in her childhood bedroom temporarily while she figured out her next steps. Reed didn't mind the company. "I got a call from David Kim yesterday," Avery said. "The civil suit against Killian's company was settled. I'll get most of my mother's estate back, plus damages." "That's good. I'm thinking about going back to school, getting my master's degree in social work." Avery sipped her coffee. "I want to help other women in situations like mine." Reed nodded. It made sense. Avery had always wanted to fix things, help people. Now she understood that some problems couldn't be fixed with love alone. Sometimes they required legal action, publicity, and the willingness to fight back. "There's something else," Avery said. "Shaw called. He's working on a book about the case. Wants to interview us. You could do it, maybe, if it helps other women recognize the warning signs, understand that they're not alone." Avery shrugged. "Might be worth it." Reed thought about the other women who'd come forward during the trial: Justine Verrill, 2 former employees, a neighbor who'd witnessed Killian's verbal abuse. They'd all found the courage to speak up once they realized they weren't the only victims. "What about you?" Avery asked. "Any regrets?" Reed considered the question. The assault charges against him had been dropped once the extent of Killian's crimes became clear. His reputation in the community had been restored, his relationship with his daughter strengthened. But he'd crossed a line that night, chosen violence over patience, and he wasn't entirely sure he'd make a different choice given the same circumstances. "I'm not sorry I stopped him from hurting you," Reed said finally. "But I'm sorry it took me so long to realize what was happening. I hid it well. You shouldn't have had to." Avery reached over and took his hand. "Thanks for not walking away." Reed remembered saying something similar to her that night, about 4 hours being too long to wait. It had taken him 48 years to understand that protecting his daughter wasn't just about being ready to fight her battles. It was about teaching her that she was worth fighting for. "Your mother used to say that love without action is just sentiment," Reed said. "Took me a while to figure out what she meant." Avery smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. She was a smart woman. Smartest person I ever knew. Except maybe her daughter. They finished their coffee as the sun climbed higher, warming the porch and the garden and the quiet space between them. Reed thought about the future: Avery's education, her recovery, the slow process of rebuilding trust and confidence. It would take time, but they had time now. Killian Myers was no longer a threat to anyone. The system that had protected him was being dismantled piece by piece. Justice, Reed had learned, wasn't always swift, but it could be thorough when the right people were willing to do the work. "I love you, Dad," Avery said suddenly. "I love you too, honey." Reed meant it more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. Love without action was just sentiment, but love with action, love that was willing to fight, to sacrifice, to endure, that was something else entirely. That was family.